why you ever chose me. It's always been a mystery. All my life I've been told I belong at the end of the line, but the other not quite. Oh, they never get it right. But it turns out they're the ones you were looking for all this time. 'Cause I'm just a nobody, trying to tell everybody all about somebody who saved my soul. Ever since you rescued me, you gave my heart a song to sing. I'm living for the world to see, nobody but Jesus. Living for the world to see, nobody but Jesus. Moses had such a and David brought a rock to the soul fight. Who King 12 outside, nobody would have chosen him to change the world from the war of the soul. Everybody's got a purpose. So when I hear their devil start talking to me, say, who do you think you are? I say, I'm just a nobody,
his face shine upon and be gracious to you. The Lord turn his face toward you and give you peace. The Lord bless you and keep you. Make his face shine upon and be gracious to you. The Lord turn his face toward you and give you peace. Amen. Amen.
Hello there. As you can see, I'm just in a football jersey, and this is for a very specific reason. Kind of goes with my message today. So, in my closet, I have a collection of New York Jets football jerseys that I've accumulated since I was in high school. I've got quarterbacks going back to when I was in high school. The one I'm wearing here is for a gentleman named Dennis Bird, who, if you attended worship at Trinity a couple years ago, I preached a sermon about Dennis Bird and his faith journey. It's a very inspirational story. Um, but these jerseys, these are pretty authentic. They look like the ones that the actual players wear during games. And I'm thinking back to a exercise I did when I was in seminary. So when I was in seminary, for one of my classes, they wanted us to take an objective look at our churches that we were serving or churches we were attending. So they had this exercise where we had to write a paper about our church from the perspective of an alien visiting it for the first time. So by alien, I mean, spaceman coming down from space, no knowledge of the church, no knowledge of what it's supposed to be. What do you see? So the alien would come in and have a completely objective view about what they were seeing. Now, if an alien were to go to, say, a football game, what would they see? They'd see thousands and thousands of people wearing these. They would see probably, if you go to MetLife Stadium where my team, the Jets, play, 75,000 people, probably 50,000 of them are going to be wearing these jerseys of different players. They're going to be wearing the exact same jerseys as the players on the field. The difference was the people on the field are the real athletes. They're the football players. But on the surface, to someone who's completely objective from the outside, we all look the same because we're all wearing the same uniform. So, in the eyes of someone who doesn't know any better, wearing this, I look like I'm a member of the New York Jets. And seeing what their record's been the last few years, that would explain a lot. I mean, I am wearing the uniform, and I could talk about the team and all the other members of the team, and I could share statistics about the team. I could tell you about the history of the team. But to those that know better, they know I'm not part of the team. I'm just a fat guy in a football jersey. But when you attend a game, there might be 75,000 people there. Only 53,000, or sorry, only 53 of them are the ones who are actually playing the game. The rest, we're just giving off the image that we are. This may seem like a weird story to tell, but it does make sense, and I'll get to my point. As most of you are aware, this is my last Sunday here at Trinity. It's been a long time coming. I announced back in November that I was going to be stepping away, and I had many reasons for staying as long as I did. Namely, I wanted to get through the holidays, Christmas, I wanted to get through Easter, and I wanted to complete the confirmation class that we were holding at the church, which we did last Easter, where 8 young people were confirmed in the church. So I had agreed back in November that my last Sunday would be the Sunday after Easter. And it's been a rough week prepping for that for a lot of reasons. And as I look back on my time in ministry, because I'm not just leaving Trinity, I'm actually stepping away from ministry entirely for the time being. Um, and as I look back on my time in ministry, I do so with kind of in many ways, a cynical view, I hate to say, because a fat guy wearing a football jersey is how I've come to see the church. Not Trinity, I mean the church as a whole. We have a lot of people wearing the uniform, wearing the cross around their necks, listening to K-Love, holding their hands to the sky, giving the impression they are on the team. But the fact is, they have no clue what it means to be a follower of Jesus. For me, this has been the toughest thing to deal with in my ministry. And I'll admit, when I came into ministry, I did so very naive, which is weird to say because I didn't step into ministry as a 22-year-old. I stepped into ministry when I was like 34. That's when I first started serving a church. I guess I stepped into it not realize I didn't know about all the issues in the Methodist Church over gay marriage and how divisive that was. I had no clue. I guess I was shielded from a lot of that in my local church. We didn't talk about that kind of stuff. I didn't realize how political the United Methodist Church was. That was very disappointing to find out. I thought I was going into the church that Jesus envisioned, the one that Jesus wanted to be. But as time went on, I started to realize that in many ways the church of today has nothing to do with the message of Jesus. Before I went into ministry, about 10, 11 years ago, I was attending a church, Methodist church, and I actually came to a place where I quit the church. And I'll say for about 2 years, I would have called myself an atheist. I was dealing with a lot in my home church. There were a lot of toxic people who were just hurtful. They went out of your way to make your life miserable. They were bullies. They were liars. They were not people that should be professing themselves as Christians by any stretch of the imagination. But they were there every week. They did work around the church. Some of them were good givers. And because of that, they felt they could throw their weight around, and it worked. Because I remember when I finally got to the point where I just couldn't take it anymore, I went to my pastor and told her I was leaving. And the words she said to me stick to me to this day, and I've probably shared these in worship before. She said she understood that these people were wrong, that these people were doing bad things. But if I leave, I'm just one person. If she stands up to them and they leave, there's 15 of them that leave the church. So rather than risk losing 15 people, regardless of how much harm they were causing, it was easier to let one person go. That made me very bitter, because the way I saw it was the church saw me as nothing but a statistic, which also made me think that God saw me as nothing but a statistic. Over time, I realized that whole experience had nothing to do with God. It had nothing to do with Jesus. In fact, this idea that the church and God are one and the same is a ridiculous sentiment, because I can tell you from firsthand experience in working for the church of today, regardless of denomination, has very little to do with God. But what I did realize over that time was my issues were not with God. My issues were with people. Flawed, hateful, vindictive people. After a while, I came to accept that, and my faith was restored. My faith in God, my faith in Jesus was restored. And I got to the point where I felt like I was being called into ministry. And I said to myself, if I go down this path, I am never going to let things like statistics or finances or politics define my ministry. I always thought, about my pastor. I always thought if my pastor just had more of a backbone, that she would have the support she needed to be effective in her ministry, and she wouldn't have to allow herself to be treated so poorly, and that she wouldn't have to sit by and watch as these vindictive, miserable people hurt her congregation. It wasn't until I became a pastor myself until I realized that the reason that she only seemed to care about statistics and finances and politics was because that's all the people above her cared about. If she were to stand up and defend herself and do what she felt was right, she wouldn't be commended for taking a stand and for holding people accountable and to try and enforce that the message of Jesus is not what they were doing. She'd be reprimanded for not having enough new members, or for not paying her shared ministries, or for having her average attendance go down. And what I learned in my time in ministry is those people that are doing that judging and reprimanding for not meeting those statistical thresholds, they wouldn't know Jesus if he was standing right in front of their face. Last week I spoke about this, and if I get nothing else across before I leave this church, is that the message of Jesus is above all else about justice. Justice for the poor, justice for the oppressed, justice for the victims. Doing the right thing even when it's unpopular. Being a pastor means being the one to show people the way according to Jesus, not the way according to me. What I want doesn't matter. It's what Jesus wants. showing people the way, not according to someone in an office with a meaningless title that somehow gives the impression that they somehow have a special connection to God when it's a man-made title. That garbage is what the Pharisees were doing, which is why Jesus came to this world in the first place, to set things straight, because there were too many people that were making the message of God about them. And we're right back where we were at. We find ourselves in the same position as the church or the temple in the days of Jesus. Not just the United Methodist Church, but as a whole. Because let's be honest, the church has completely, or not completely, but has severely declined in relevancy over the years. And maybe that's because the church has stopped being authentic. And right now we're in a place where this mostly irrelevant institution in many ways has people at the top who are doing whatever they can to cling to their position, to hold on to their salaries, to hold on to their pensions, to get as much money out of the churches as they can, and to hell with justice, to hell with doing what is right. So when I think about how my pastor treated me like nothing more than a statistic, I get it. I still don't like it, but I get it. I started to come to this realization even before I started serving at Trinity. In seminaries, I studied the life and the ministry of Jesus. I started to look at Jesus through a different lens, and I really started to admire Jesus, the man. Not the propaganda version of Jesus that has blonde hair and blue eyes and thinks you should give all your money to a denomination and worship a building, but the rebel, the outcast, the advocate for doing what was right. The man who didn't worry about the consequences of going against the system because ultimately that system had no power over him. Even starting to have those feelings, though, I went forward in ministry and tried to be a part of the institution, thinking maybe that if I was strong enough in my convictions, I could maybe somehow be an agent of change. If I stood up for what I felt was right and called people out on their actions, then maybe I could make a difference. Call it arrogance, call it stupidity. That's what I thought. But I learned the hard way that when you are part of a denomination that is about preserving its empire, unless the actions you take are about making life easier for the empire and making sure the empire gets their money, they don't care. And ultimately, that's why I'm stepping away. I feel I need to step away and deprogram. I need to rid myself of that propaganda that's been shoved down my throat for too long and get in touch with who the real Jesus is and find a way to be in service to that mission. I want people to see me as attempting to be an authentic representative of the word of Jesus, not just a fat guy in a football jersey. I have a long way to go. I've made a lot of mistakes in my ministry. People think that you come into a church and you know how to do everything right, and you will be judged more severely than any other time in your life. I don't know what it is about being a pastor that people think they can treat you as poorly as they do, but I have had people say things to me, and I've seen things said to other pastors you wouldn't get away with at a job. You wouldn't get away with in your own family. People think they can treat a pastor because it's an unfair fight. And what's the pastor going to do? Fight back? And when the pastor does, oh, that pastor's a horrible person because they talk back to me. Well, maybe you're a horrible person for what you said to the pastor. It's a win argument. It's a fight you can't win because you have to hold yourself to an impossible standard. But with that being said, I realize I have a long way to go. I've made lots of mistakes. There are a lot of things I could have done differently. But I'm still trying to live up to that vow that I made to myself when I first went into ministry, to do what I thought was the right thing, regardless of the consequences. Because of that, there are a lot of people who left this church during my time. I'm okay with that. Because to me, a church where the members put what they want over what God wants isn't really a church anyway. So maybe our statistics don't look as good as my predecessors, but I would say that at this point, the church is more authentic than it was in those times. So as I step away from here, I'm praying for myself that I find something that sparks me and reinvigorates me. And that's also my hope for all of you. One person that really inspired me in my ministry was a gentleman that I've talked about many times before. and that is retired United Methodist Bishop Peter Weaver. He was one of my seminary professors and one of the only people I've met in the church where I felt truly moved listening to him speak. And I felt, every time he talked, I felt like this man is absolutely here for the right reasons. And he's told this story in class one time about this little church where he was serving. He was serving in Pennsylvania as the bishop. And there was this little church in his conference. And unlike our conference leadership, he actually went to every church that was in his under his watch. Um, he went to these churches because he wanted to get to know the people. It's an interesting idea. I don't think we have that around here. He went because he wanted to get to know them, and he went to this little country church, but it was busting at the seams on a Sunday morning. And he's like, wow, what are these people doing that this place is just so packed and this place is going on? And he heard the story of this church, and what it was is this was a kind of a little old dying church in the middle of nowhere. And had these three little old ladies that were a big part of the church, and they would hang out there during the day. And one day, one of the little old ladies looked out the window and saw some kids playing. And she said to the other ladies, what if we baked some cookies for those kids and gave them cookies and milk? So they baked some cookies, got some milk, and invited the kids in for cookies and milk. And they would come in and they'd have the cookies and milk, and then they'd go back out to play. And then they thought to themselves, well, wait a minute, why don't we get ourselves a TV? We get a big TV, and we've got all these movies here. We could show these good Christian kids movies. The kids could come in after school and have cookies and milk and watch movies. So they started inviting the kids in the area to come and watch movies and have cookies and milk. And over time, through establishing that connection, that relationship, the families of those kids started to go to worship there. To the point where this little country church, the ministry that was started by these three little ladies, and Bishop Weaver, when he talked about this story, he would start crying because it meant so much to him. They sparked and built this beautiful community in the most unlikely of places. So as you, Trinity, go forth into your future, I know you're scared. But remember that God works miracles all the time. There is nothing in any statistical report that suggests that church with the three little old ladies making cookies was going to grow. In fact, there were probably people in their annual conference calling them a waste of time, saying they should be shut down. But these three ladies had sincere hearts, and they found a way to truly be the hands and feet of Christ, and it became an authentic, Jesus-centered community. Another church I talk about a lot is Seneca Street UMC in Buffalo, where I know the pastor, Dee Finch. We used to work together in youth ministries. This church is in one of the poorest sections of Buffalo, yet they find a way, at least a couple of times per week, to provide meals that feed over 200 people. A couple of years ago, I ran into Pastor Dee at a conference event, and I commended her on how well the church was doing because I kept seeing things on Facebook. And she just got this big smile on her face. I can only describe it as pure joy. And she said, I don't know if I'll get a paycheck next week, but we're feeding a lot of people. A few weeks ago, I was emailing her because I wanted to send a donation to her church. And as we talked, she said that the passion for this ministry has caught on so much with other churches in the area, some Methodist, some not, that now they were getting involved and they were coming in and prepping the meals and providing the food. And many times her team from her church can just sit back and enjoy or see the joy that this experience is bringing to those others and be proud of what they started and letting others experience that joy. And I'm saying the word joy a lot because that's the one word that comes to mind. Because as she talks about this ministry, she does so with pure joy. That is truly God at work. So for Trinity, my prayer for you is that you find that spark. Trust me, it's not going to come from a book or the conference telling you what to do or the DS telling you what to do. Remember, when the Apostle Peter spoke at Pentecost and preached, 3,000 people came to accept Christ in one day. The United Methodist Church as a whole has been losing members at an exponential rate for the last 50 years. When you are authentic and truly seeking to be the hands and feet of Jesus, those efforts will be blessed. If you're nothing but a fat guy in a football jersey, God isn't going to waste his time. So in closing, there's a scripture I want to share with you. And it comes from Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verses 1 to 8, and you're all going to remember this passage. There's a season for everything and a time for every matter under the heavens. A time for giving birth and a time for dying. A time for planting and a time for uprooting what was planted. A time for killing and a time for healing. A time for tearing down and a time for building up. A time for crying and a time for laughing. A time for mourning and a time for dancing. A time for throwing stones and a time for gathering stones. A time for embracing and a time for avoiding embraces. A time for searching and a time for losing. A time for keeping and a time for throwing away. A time for tearing down and a time for repairing. A time for keeping silent and a time for speaking. A time for loving and a time for hating. A time for war and a time for peace. So both you and I are entering different seasons, different times in our faith journeys. I'm not a big fan of the old adage that everything happens for a reason, but I do believe that there's something to be learned from every experience. What I've learned in my time in the Methodist Church is I don't do well with politics because I can't keep my big mouth shut. I'm way too brutally honest. Because of that, I don't want my livelihood tied to my ability to be political. I have the ability, I was an accountant before I was a pastor, did very well in my career, and since I've resumed that career, I'm still doing very well at it. Got a recent promotion. I have the ability to support myself through other means. Many of my colleagues don't. Because of that, I feel I need to support myself through those other means so that whenever I serve in ministry again in the future, whatever that looks like, I don't have to compromise to the bullies. I don't have to compromise to those who have bad intentions. I don't need to have people dangling their ties in front of my face, suggesting that they won't give them unless they get their way. I can do ministry trying to be as authentic to the message of Jesus as I possibly can. Maybe that means I'm doing Bible study in a small church with 5 people, but as long as those 5 people are there for the right reasons, I would consider that a success, despite what our leadership in Liverpool might think. I hope what you've learned is that the way things were being done in Trinity for the last 20 years wasn't working. There was a lot of bad stuff going on behind the scenes in this church that many of you know nothing about. I would even argue this church was rotting from the inside. Over the last 20 years, this church has caused a lot of harm. A lot of harm to its members, a lot of harm to its pastors. This church has squandered a lot of resources and has been used as a vehicle for people with selfish motivations to put their wants before the will of God. But you can't do anything about that now. All you can do is work to rebuild this community, not in the image of the conference, not in the image of whoever comes to the planning meetings and tries to bully everyone into getting their way, but in the image of Jesus. What will be your weekly meals for the poor? What will be your cookies and movies and milk for the neighborhood kids? I pray that you find that spark, and that spark strengthens you for the work that you have in store. I wish you all the best. There has been a lot of tough stuff in the last few years for me at this church, but there's been a lot of good. There's a lot of people I've met, hope to still keep in touch with, some relationships I will truly cherish. And I pray that down the road I hear how well you're doing, because you've, as a community, banded together and decided to really listen to the words of Jesus to tell you what he has in store for the people of Trinity. God bless. Bye.
Oh Lord my God, when I in awesome wonder consider all the words thy hands have made, I see the stars, I hear the rolling thunder, thy power throughout the universe displayed. Then sings my soul, my Savior God, to thee. How great thou art! How great thou art! Then sings my soul, my Savior God, to thee. How great thou art! How great thou art! And when I think of God, His Son not sparing, sent Him to die, I scarce can take it in. That on that cross, my burden gladly bearing, He bled and died to take away my sin. Then sings my soul, my Savior God, to thee. How great thou art! How great thou art! Then sings my soul, my Savior God, to thee. How great thou art! How great thou art!
With shout of acclamation, and take me home, for joy shall fill my heart, and I shall bow in humble adoration, and let proclaim, my God, how great thou art. Then